Hello and welcome to the CFB SuperShow, brought to you by the FTN Network. I'm your host, Walt Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, and joined by my co-host Jake Kucheck. We're bringing you week 11 of the college football season, if you can believe it. Had a couple of weekday max slates that we just got through, and some pretty fun Sun Belt games as well. A tremendous amount of fantasy-friendly games this week. And, of course, college basketball started on Monday. Pulling double duty over here. It has been a very busy week, but a fun one, a profitable one. Green screens and window trips galore. And I know last week was a pretty solid one for us here at FTN as well. Jake, how are you doing? Ready to get through this week 11 madness and just overall some real good games to target?
Yeah, the Maction is fun. We do love it, but the one thing it's lacking is the large prize pools. You can't really hit it big on the Maction the same way you can on a Saturday, but we do love it anyway. It is enjoyable, and I'm ready to get back into some larger slates here with some more explosive offenses.
Absolutely. If you're new to the Super Show, what we do here is we go game by game, focusing primarily on the DraftKings slate. But if you're watching live or on demand, feel free to ask your FanDuel questions. I'll circle back around to those. And then also the Saturday morning show, which takes place 1 hour before lock. That's the Q&A session. We'll get all of your FanDuel related stuff answered there as well. Any injury news, all of that good stuff. At the very end, we'll provide you with a 3-man core we're looking at to build around for a main lineup setting, and then any prize picks, underdog, or betting opportunities. Let's dive right in. Skip the rest of the pleasantries here, and we'll start with Florida versus Texas, kicking off with the Longhorns. 22.5-point favorites currently, a total of 47.5. Start us off, Jake. What do we want to do with this one?
What we don't want to do is use any Florida Gators. This is going to be a tough spot for them. Pretty big statement game here for Texas and rejoining the rankings of the elite of college football. And it's, the defense is going to show up pretty well. So can pretty much skip right over the Florida side. There was the thought last week to maybe use DK against Georgia, and he ended up pretty popular, I think, and he didn't really do anything at all. He's going to have even more opportunity here with both Eugene Wilson and potentially Elijah Badger out, but I still can't get to it. I think this is going to be a very ugly game for Florida, a lot of 3-and-outs. On the Texas side, there's some interest, some tepid interest in some beats. Is not going to get to 8,500 for Quinn Ewers. They just aren't going to need to throw enough for that to be worthwhile. I don't see him running in multiple touchdowns either. The running back pricing is interesting. We've been on Wisner for several weeks now as the lead back, and DK still has Jaden Blue priced higher. It's only slightly higher, only $400 difference, but those are flipped in terms of the actual usage in the running game. So Wisner at 5K is certainly interesting. He had some involvement in the passing game against Vandy, 5 catches for 39 yards, nothing crazy. But still interesting at 5K in a game that they should be able to run pretty much as well as they want. And so if you want to go to Jaden Blue as kind of an alt build play, I kind of get it, but Wisner is the main interest in the running game for me. As far as the receiving game goes, Jonte Cook left the program. He hasn't really done much in quite some time anyhow, so not a huge change to the wide receiver room. What is a little bit of a change is Isaiah Bond should be back for this one, and at only 4,800, I think that's a tempting price for his skill set and his ability to have some explosive games. And no love lost with him for the Florida program either. So I think that's the main guy I'm going to key on. Obviously, DeAndre Moore, the box score watchers will see that DeAndre Moore Went 6 for 97 and 2 against Vandy. That was with Isaiah Bond out. So don't know that we're going to necessarily be able to expect that same level of volume or productivity from DeAndre Moore. And then Matthew Golden has been just kind of always there. Other than Colorado State game, 350 and 2 at the beginning of the year, did very well there at a bargain bin price, and he's priced even lower now. But doesn't really get the volume in this offense, and especially here in this one where they should kind of run away with it. I don't know that any individual receiver is going to get a lot of volume. I do like the Bond play because I think they're going to want to reintegrate him into the process, get him ramped up, ready for the playoff, that kind of thing. And then got to mention the tight end Gunnar Helm. He's been a very steady receiver, getting significant volume throughout the season, usually somewhere between 4 to 6 catches, a little bit touchdown dependent, but at only 3,200 could be worthwhile. Ryan Wingo, kind of the opposite, very much a boomer bust guy, but also only 3,200. And that kind of does it for me in terms of the interest on the Texas side. Really, any of those receivers are playable, but Bond is the one I would want to focus on, and then Wisner in the running game. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and I mean, and Lagway's banged up now too, so it could get real ugly for the Gators very, very fast. All right, moving on, we have West Virginia versus Cincinnati, total of 55. The Bearcats favored by 4.5. Now, this is one of the games that when you first see it, kind of have some interest on, but the games behind it are just so juicy. It's really difficult for me to get too heavily invested in this one. I will say without Garrett Green, the West Virginia offense doesn't have the same kind of appeal. He is dealing with an upper body injury and considered highly questionable / borderline doubtful right now. Nico Marichal would be the quarterback in his stead. Also has some rushing upside price there at 6.8K, so there's some merit. But the Bearcats have been okay. Running back-wise, we know they typically split between Jaheim White and C.J. Donaldson. Donaldson did suffer some issues in the Arizona game. Now they're saying he's going to play this week. That's what they said last week as well. He ended up only getting 8 carries. At this point, I think it's pretty difficult to get behind wanting to use him. If you're going to use a running back, I think Jaheim White would be the guy, but there's still enough rushing upside from – if it's not Green, Marichal, and if Donaldson's in for at least 5 to 6 carries, it just muddies the water for all of them. And same can be said kind of for the receivers. They're all cheap, 4K or less. My preferred option would be Hudson Clement. Typically, he's a boomer bust guy. Touchdown props typically with Clement. You got your guy Traylon Ray, who's down there at 3.8, and then the safety valve, who's the tight end, Cole Taylor at 3.5, but no real upside there for him. On the Bearcats side, I would love to look at Corey Kiner, who's priced only at 5.9. Very cheap for what can be considered a bell cow-esque back. But West Virginia is only giving up 121 rushing yards per game to their opponents. So there's not going to be a ton of opportunities there. I think this is one of those games where he might get 17 to 20 touchdowns, but we're talking about a YPC of 3 to 4. And it's going to be very, very ugly. He's going to have to score touchdowns to really pay off. And I think this one, actually, the under 55 looks pretty healthy to me, especially if Garrett Green doesn't play. So as good as price as Kiner is there, not so sure we're going to be able to pull the trigger. Brendan Sorsby at 7.9 is relatively cheap, throwing 30-plus pass attempts in 4 straight games. Has that rushing upside, 26 rushing yards in 3 of his last 4. Doesn't have a huge ceiling in a matchup like this. He hung 40 on Texas Tech, which everybody does typically, except for last week, I guess. And he's been right around 20, 21 fantasy points. So again, looks good on paper, but then when you really dive in, it's not as great of a matchup. You do have the tight end, Joe Royer, who has been very cheap all season and a reliable target. 450 and a touchdown is typically what we can expect for him, which is pretty damn good at 4K. And then you go up to 6.7, the top receiver on the team, the highest amount of targets, Xavier Henderson. But defenses have figured that out. And you've seen the Texas Tech game. Yeah, he did really well. But, Houston figured out how to contain him. UCF somehow figured out how to contain him. And then he had a pretty rough outing against Colorado as well, which is a team I would have thought they would have been able to put up some points on, and they simply didn't. So ultimately it comes down to you've got some value in a Royer play, but it's just not that exciting of a game for me. Not worried about fading it too much either. If Kiner ends up being chalky, I'm okay with that because I think stylistically, this game's going to be pretty ugly overall. Do you have anything you want to add before we move on?
Yeah, it's an uglied up kind of game. Would have been excited if this one happened earlier in the year with everyone healthy, but yeah, rough one especially for West Virginia.
Yeah, if it was week 2, this would be like, totally fantasy friendly, but unfortunately, not so much. All right, moving on, we have Syracuse versus Boston College at 52.5 total. Boston College 2-point favorite, and this is another one that maybe if it was earlier in the year, we might be saying, hey, this looks great, but all of a sudden, Kyle McCord looks like Kyle McCord. So what do you think about this game?
Man, yeah, it's Kyle McCord turned back into a pumpkin. It's Halloween time, whatever, Thanksgiving. And so, yeah, I want to like this game. I want this game to be an offensive explosion. BC has given up 30 points to like just about everybody they played. And Syracuse hadn't been real good on defense either. Especially Syracuse coming off, a 38-31 overtime game last week, and I want this to be an explosive game. It certainly has the makings of one. Start on the BC side. Castellanos, if he was like 8-2 or 8-5 or something, I would have a lot of pause in using him because we haven't necessarily seen him have the ceiling to pay that off. At 6,600, I kind of got to think about using him. He's definitely got the mobility. He's a little capped on the upside just because this is not the most explosive offense in the world, but at the same time, Syracuse has been getting up a lot of points and scoring a lot of points. And so has the makings of a back and forth affair. Definitely can see myself talking myself into Castellanos before the week is over. Not real excited about using a Treshaun Ward. I know he had the big game against Louisville. A lot of that came via passing work, and he got about 30% of his receiving yards on the season in that game. So a little bit of anomaly. I don't know that we're going to necessarily see that same type of usage again from him. If you do think we're getting that at 4,700, that's a pretty decent price, but I don't really want to go there. In the passing game for BC, it's basically Bond and Morales. Bond is kind of the guy that we would typically think to pair with Castellanos. He's been a little bit ho-hum of late, but kind of just is that explosive play and touchdown variance that isn't always going to go your way. And he is a guy that Castellanos consistently looks to when on the off chance he decides to throw a pass. So could have a double Bond lineup with Bond from Texas and Bond from BC. Could start that way. That'd be interesting. Not forcing it. Might as well happily go with Castellanos naked, but Bond is interesting as a pairing partner. And then if you want to go even cheaper to Morales at only 3,800, that has viability as well. As far as the Syracuse side, I'm not paying $9K for Kyle McCord. I know that he's had those games this year where that's been worth it, but we'll ride that out, and we're going to let him beat us if he chooses to do so. The guy I do have a ton of interest in is Quentin Allen. I mean, he's been nuts at different times this year, a little bit hit and miss. Sometimes we can get that underperforming game because he's not a running back that's going to see 30 carries necessarily, but with the work in the passing game, and he's had 5 and 6 catches each of the last 2 weeks, has had as many as 9 earlier in the season. And coming off a huge game, 21 carries for 121 yards and 3 touchdowns against Virginia Tech. Did have an overtime period, but still massive game for Quentin Allen. And I think this one sets up for him to repeat that success. 8,100, we're going to need it. We're going to need him to be the focal point of the offense in order for that to pay off. But you are going to be chasing a lot of points if Quentin Allen goes off and you don't have any piece. So I do have a lot of interest there. As far as the receivers, if we're not going to McCord, we don't need to force any of these receivers. However, we've seen some explosiveness from just about all of them. Trebor Pena, we haven't seen a super ceiling game from him recently, but he's been solid in terms of the target share and been decent as a possession receiver. Jackson Meeks has been explosive at times, had that huge game against NC State. Couple duds to follow that up, so don't necessarily need to force him. And then Justice Ross Simmons is back. 4 catches, 88 yards, and 2 touchdowns against Virginia Tech. At 5,300, he's kind of the cheapest of that bunch. And then you got tight end Rondé Gadsden, who's been quiet lately, but he's the kind of guy that could be quiet for a while. And then who knows, could have an explosive game out of him. So all those guys are getting looks. Any of them are really viable. I think Pena is probably the guy that I would go to if I were using Kyle McCord, but I'm not going to be using a lot of Kyle McCord. I think my primary focus is going to be using Quentin Allen and then Castellanos on the other side, possibly pairing Castellanos with a receiver, not forcing it.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of weeks ago, McCord threw those 3 pick sixes in the first half, and it's just like I never seen that before. He's got a group of receivers. Ross Simmons back, as you mentioned, but he kind of violated a lot of trust for me on that game. So I don't know if I can go back to him either. And BC, defense has been spotty here or there, but they probably contain him a little bit. They've done okay. But that Syracuse room is really crowded now, the receiver room. So it's going to be kind of a wait and see there for me. All right, we're going to move on to the next game here, which is Miami versus Georgia Tech. Miami's 11-point favorites, total of 64. So there are 3 games on this slate that have cracked over 62. This is one of them. Georgia Tech defensively, they've been pretty good. They've held their own in the ground game, and they've been pretty decent overall in the past, but a lot of that came from early in the season, and they've had some pretty porous efforts here lately, especially against upper tier competition. Haynes King has moved into game time decision territory here. They're certainly going to need him for this one. If they have to go back to Zach Piron, that's going to be a disaster. They just can't generate any offense. They managed 6 points against Virginia Tech. He did okay, threw for almost 300 yards against Notre Dame, but got picked off a bunch of times, sacked a bunch of times. He's just that guy that they use as like a goal line running back CFL style, but having to actually run the offense is just not very good. So they're going to need Haynes King in this one for sure. If there is no Haynes King, it does affect this game dramatically for me. I obviously want some of the Miami side here with a high total like this, but if it turns into a blowout, Miami's already shown us that they're not afraid to, call off the dogs and let Cam Ward kind of just hand the ball off a bunch of times. So there is that concern for me. And we'll have to monitor that news as lock approaches, Saturday morning. Jamal Haynes has had 2 rough games, correlates to the fact that the quarterback they're using is just really, really awful. The 6K price tag on Haynes is excellent. We saw that game against UNC where we were heavy on him, just how good he can be with looks. They do kind of hand the ball off to QB4 or, QB4s, RB8s, fullbacks, and all kinds of different players. So his workload could be higher than it actually is. Definitely looking his direction for GBPs. But again, that's all tied to Haynes King. And right now, the receivers for Georgia Tech are super cheap, but again, even with King around, I'm not sure we can get to them. We saw Georgia Tech receivers and Georgia Tech in general be really chalky against Duke back in week 6. And then really chalky the following week against North Carolina, and they pretty much bricked out in both of those. Only 4.8 for Rutherford, only 4.7 for Singleton, but I don't have a lot of trust in them right now. We'll have to see how that news shakes out. For the Miami side, Cam Ward's still extremely expensive at 10.6. He's like 12.8 on FanDuel. People on DraftKings have begun to avoid him because of that high price. Makes sense, but on FanDuel, where quarterback play is a little more valuable, he's still like 30 to 40%. So last week at 12.6, 12.7, he put up 40. he was like owned by half the field. Pretty crazy. He threw for 400 yards against that Duke team. Got a little bit of a scare there as they have several times, but they ended up pulling away. I will just continue to bet his props, 300 plus passing yards, over 2.5 passing touchdowns, but definitely hard to fit him into your lineup right now. But on FanDuel, it makes more sense. Running back room, Mark Fletcher's all the way down there at 3.9. Pretty much a gimme for a touchdown when they get close. He's gotten 12 to 15 carries in each of the last 3 games, and at least double-digit touches in 4 of the last 5. Splitting the load with Damian Martinez. We've seen some explosiveness from Martinez and some more carries there against FSU, but this isn't a matchup that I think they'll have that much success. Like I said, Georgia Tech's running defense has been fairly solid, and this is one of those games where I think Martinez will be stuck between 50 and 75 yards. If this was last year, 6-1, we'd be all in, of course, but it's a different time, different system, and a different place. Wide receivers, this room is definitely deep. Xavier Restrepo is the leader, 71 targets on the season, 51 catches, 856 yards, 9 touchdowns. He had an absolute massive performance last week against Duke. 8 catches, 146 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And he's had some pretty big games. 3 of his last 4, he has hit over 100 yards, but we were yet to see like that truly just slate breaking game where it's like, yeah, I got a lot of different guys in this room that could take over, but this is my house. And that was the game that he had there. 10 plus targets, 7.5 expensive receivers. I'm not opposed to paying up for him this week, depending on that news. Again, I do favor still going a little bit cheaper. Guys like Jacoby George, who has got 48 targets on the season, 31 catches, 428 yards and 5 touchdowns. Isaiah Horton, who has emerged as a very good player, WR2 at this point, 64 targets, which is second on the team, 46 catches, 548 yards, 4 touchdowns. And then you have Samuel Brown, 47 targets, 30 catches, 456 yards, 2 touchdowns. It's a little hard other than like showdown in time to put those guys into your main lineup, because there'll be the game you'll play George and he'll get 2 for 20. There'll be the game you play Brown, and then George goes for 550 and 2 touchdowns. So it's really difficult. The 3-2 price point on Brown is really intriguing. He did have 2 for 46 last week. He's generally going to give you under 10 fantasy points, but there's going to be that one game where he hits a 60-yard touchdown or gets 2 to 3 catches like he did against Louisville. Definitely has that upside, and we saw in the past during his time at Houston just how good he can be. So that price is intriguing. My man, Elijah Arroyo, the tight end, he's kind of fallen off, not getting enough targets, so you can't really use him right now, unfortunately. And George at 3.9 is definitely a amicable play, I think, that you could generally use. I would much rather use George or Brown than I would Rutherford or Singleton at this point. And then a nice little mid-range play is Horton, who's probably going to get ignored by the masses because you're either going to go up to Restrepo or you're going to take some of that value there. But Horton is steady Eddie, just really consistently putting up those double-digit fantasy points. So you're going to get a safe guy there, maybe a single entry play above all. But definitely looking at Jacoby George at 3.9 more than I am at Restrepo, just because I want to save a little bit of money here to pay up at running back, which it's back to running back season. They have been absolutely crushing the slate. So that's my take. What do you I know on Ward, he's expensive, so you won't be looking there, but how are you kind of pursing through these receivers? Because it is some intriguing prices on those guys like Brown and George.
Yeah, I kind of see it the same way. I think there probably will be a tendency to chase Restrepo. And I don't know, man. Miami needs to win a blowout game. Like
Right.
there have been too many close calls, and I could see this one going 21 skunk pretty quick, and then them not needing to really really air it out with Cam Ward as much as they have been to get Restrepo to that ceiling. So yeah, I do like, if I'm forced to use somebody from this game, I do like the cheaper receivers like a George or a Brown, but I think I'm full fade on this one, and I think I'm Miami minus whatever they end up being. Was it 10.5 1, something like that? I think they go up pretty big pretty early in this one, and it might look fun from a DFS perspective in the first quarter, and you get the no Restrepo, no money in the chat, but then the offense kind of fizzles in the second, third, and fourth quarters, and they just end up handing it off to a bunch of different people. So I don't think this one stays real competitive.
Yeah, before the FSU game, I would have said like, "Hey, Ward's on the Heisman chase. They've been playing him, but they had been in so many close games, and they just kind of took their foot off the gas. He did throw 35 times in that FSU game, just didn't complete a lot of big hitters on that one. So remains to be seen. You're going to need a touchdown there. It's just a very high total to not have any exposure. But yeah, it could just be spread out and nobody hits. But those cheap prices are really appealing. All right, moving on. We have Minnesota versus Rutgers. Total of 46. Typical Big Ten battle there. 6-point spread in favor of Minnesota. Rutgers is susceptible to the pass. Maybe not like Maryland bad, but definitely potential Brosmer redux here. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, I like all aspects of Minnesota in this one. Maybe not together. Like, I don't know that we're getting to a Brosmer, Taylor, Jackson stack or anything like that. But any of those pieces individually, even Elijah Spencer down at 3.8 is going to be interesting in this one. I think Minnesota is a much better team, should be able to do whatever they want. USC, who has not been impressive at all, had their way with Rutgers, and that was with former USC quarterback Miller Moss at the helm. And so with Brosmer and the element, kind of dynamic downfield element that he's brought to this offense, keeping the defense from being able to stack the box against Taylor. I think everybody's going to be successful and efficient, and it's going to be a beautiful thing to watch. Taylor at 8.7 is probably the piece that I have the most interest in. We're going to need some cheapies somewhere, so hopefully you got something for me. If we're doing Darius Taylor and LaQuint Allen in our running back spots, because that's going to take up a lot of salary. But he's too good and gets too much volume, and too many running backs have smashed against this Rutgers defense. Well, receivers too, but running back, as the running back in Minnesota, he should get a ton of volume in this one. And then in the receiving game, pass catchers, Jackson is the obvious alpha. Had that huge game against Maryland that we were all over, and took us to pay dirt, 9-1, 17-2 in that one. Followed it up with a little bit more of a pedestrian 5 for 74 against Illinois at Illinois. A lot tougher defense, so not entirely surprising that he came back down to earth a little bit. But I think we see 100 yards and a score from Jackson in this one, certainly. So either Jackson or Taylor should be a priority in most lineups. And if you're using Jackson, I don't hate using Brosmer as well. And then Spencer's kind of come into his own as well. We haven't seen the massive volume to Spencer in the same way that we have with Jackson, but 6 catches in each of the last 2 games, 99 yards against Maryland, 67 against Illinois, 2 scores against Maryland. So that kind of buoyed his fantasy production. But we could very easily get like a 775 and a score out of Elijah Spencer, and he's only 3,800 as compared to Jackson at 55. So definitely something to keep in mind there. They don't really have a third guy that you would need to focus on. Brockington has flashed at times. Gears caught a touchdown against Illinois, but there's not really anybody else that gets significant volume in the offense. So really just Jackson and Spencer, which is kind of nice. It's kind of a diet version of Ibuka and Jeremiah Smith in that offense, since most of the volume does go to those two guys. So that is the Minnesota side. On the Rutgers side, not interested in a ton unless we get news that Mononga is going to miss and that we get a full helping of Antoine Raymond at only 3,400. If he's getting 20 touches, doesn't matter who he's playing. You gotta be considering a running back with that kind of volume at only 3,400 on a price tag. So the non guy, whole different ball guy, 7,400. And as much as I like him, I don't know that this is really the spot to use him. I think Minnesota is going to control the ball quite a bit in this one, and we're not going to get a 30 carry Rutgers running back game, regardless of which one of them ends up going. So I would have to go only if we get Raymond at that cheaper price. And then Dymere Miller down at 4K. If we think that they're going to be chasing points, and I do think that is the correct way to be looking at this, 11 catches for 131 yards against USC. That would be a heck of a performance at only 4K. So if we're going to be using some expensive running backs, Dymere Miller makes sense. He's going to have some volume. KJ Duff has had a little bit of success on not a lot of volume recently, and that's pretty much it on the record side in terms of run backs. So watch the news from Monongai. Luckily, this is the 12 Eastern kick, so hopefully we'll have that news before the slate starts, and we can adjust accordingly.
Absolutely. All right, moving on. We have Army versus North Texas. Total of 64.5. Army comes in as a 4-point favorite. Second week in a row we've had Army on the slate. Second time in 3 weeks we've had North Texas on the slate. This happens to be the second game that heads over 62 points. But it's one that I got a little bit of question marks about because, yeah, that's a hell of a total. And we know North Texas can put it on people. And they give up a ton, too. Looking at North Texas defensively, they're giving up 271 yards per game through the air to opposing quarterbacks and 177.4 yards on the ground. Meanwhile, they're putting up 400 plus yards of offense through the air, 150, 200 yards. Like, they're just crazy. But they're playing an Army team that has really locked down defensively, and they haven't given up a lot of points. Granted, they haven't played an offense like North Texas. You go through the list: Air Force, UAB, Tulsa, Temple, Rice, Lehigh. Not exactly the who's who of offensive football teams. So something's got to give here. And I do think North Texas can have some success. The other thing we need to pay attention to, because we were all hyped to use Bryson Daly last week. I mean, he was going to be like industry chalk, 60%. And then coming into it, he has an illness, scratched out. The offense kind of fell on its face. Dwayne Coleman stepped in. We obviously couldn't pay the 8-9 price for him. Thank God we didn't, because he was horrible. We did go to Kanye Udo, who took over everything, 22 carries, 158 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So right now it looks like Daly is going to be good to go, but I will believe it when I see it. The type of illness that they were talking, I hate to say it, makes me feel like it's mono or something like that. I've seen this so many times with players. So that's something that can take you out for a while. I hope it was just something like a flu. But we'll see. If Daly plays against North Texas, obviously he's going to have to be in heavy consideration. I typically don't like to pay up at quarterback. I'm a much bigger proponent of running backs. You've already given us a couple. But if Daly plays, you got to consider it. North Texas defensively, I mean, he's going to put up 150 plus rushing yards. He'll throw for 125 plus, and he'll likely score 4 or 5 touchdowns combination through the air and on the ground. So that news will be important. If he can't go, I think we go right back to Kanye Udo, whose price is only up 400 to 5.9. He'll be a lot heavier owned. He got up to like 25% against Air Force, and they were really rough for the first half. It looked like it was going to be like a 9-3 field goal fest. But in the second half, they got smart. They started handing him the rock, and he did his thing. And I think that would be the same exact manner that would happen. So Udo, if Daly doesn't play, Daly if he does. If Daly goes, you can look to some of his receivers. They're interesting. 3-8, you've got Casey Reynolds with Daly. He's, connecting on at least one big play of 35 yards or more. So you can kind of count on him at 3-8 there to a degree. Don't know that I would necessarily prioritize him, but I would be, considering it for sure. We do have Tyrell Robinson back, who is the former quarterback of the team. Did get a couple of carries, got a reception, starting to use him more at 4-1. He's kind of an interesting GPP look. If Daly couldn't go, I almost wonder if, hey, the Coleman experience wasn't great. what can we do here with Tyrell? Put him in a position to maybe run the offense. So we'll see. On the North Texas side, if this was, North Texas going up against Memphis, going up against Tulane again, I mean, Chandler Morris would be a quarterback I'm really comfortable with. At 8-9, he was under 35% on that slate. We were super happy with it. 449 yards. The problem here is that Army's ball control offense is going to try and keep their offense off the field, right? So I don't know that he's going to get up to 60 pass attempts, because I feel like if they do have success on offense against Army, they're going to be quick strike type stuff where they're going to just be up, marching down the field, 2 minutes done. Army gets it back 9 minutes later. Then North Texas takes that's what I'm worried about there with Chandler Morris and that 9-4 tag. I would rather play Daly in that case, but I love Chandler Morris typically. Running back room is a mess. Everybody's hurt. They don't really use them all that much for North Texas. We saw Shane Porter a little bit. Then we saw McGill, who got 4 carries. He scored a touchdown, sure, but really no reason to look at the running backs there. They're not going to have any success running the football anyways. It's all going to be passing. DT Sheffield, to me, is underpriced. He should be at 10K up there with Travis Hunter, on FanDuel. But again, problematic is how many opportunities is he going to actually have? When they do throw the ball, that's typically going to go to him. It's tough to look at that price of 7-9 and look at his logs and see that he's had 12 plus targets in 3 straight games, 120 plus receiving yards, 5 touchdowns. He scored a touchdown in basically every single game since week 4. Really tough to get away from. But you have to really kind of plan ahead there with the way that this one's going to play out. We did see Damon Ward come back after being out since week 4, and he made a big splash, 6 catches for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns on 9 targets, 32 fantasy points. He was definitely the secondary play there in the stack. Dalton Carnes still relatively cheap at 3.9. Carnes had 6 or 7 targets, and he had a relatively good game for his price, which was 3.1. Remember, it was wow, min price. This is one of the best min price plays we've had all year. 4 catches for 65 yards. He did have a very close shoestring type of play that could have been a touchdown. I don't know that I can use him at the 3.9, a little bit higher there. Clearly, he's going to be behind Ward as the WR3 now, and I'd rather just go ahead and find that price up to 5.2 to play Ward if I'm playing anyone. And that means Blair Conride is all the way down the list now. 3 for 29 last game. You can pretty much safely ignore him. So big decisions here. News. It's in a later, the afternoon window. So you'll be sitting there. A lot of these games in the early part are kind of fadeable, as we've mentioned. There's one left we'll talk about that has some pieces, but it looks like I'm going to have a lot of PMR. That's going to be kind of the story that we have our Discord do as well, and kind of told them about how we're going to attack this slate. So we're going to have some things to chew on and think about as that comes up. And as long as we get that news in a timely manner about Daly, we can kind of plan ahead. And that's the kind of thing we'll talk out multiple scenarios. Hey, if Daly plays, here's what we can do. If Daly doesn't play, we're going Udo. But the big decision there is going to be North Texas. And I'm really interested to see how the ownership shakes out. I haven't seen anything yet. I'll get to that in the morning, but I'm just curious to see what the industry is going to do on North Texas, because this Army defense to this point has been absolute nails. But again, when you're facing Lehigh, Tulsa, Temple, you look like a steel curtain. When you face a team like North Texas, you might look more like the Seahawks. We'll see if that ends up being the case there. So what do you think, man? This is another game with the high total, but there's an opportunity for it to maybe be like the Miami game and not work out so well. But the big question I want to know is, what do you do with North Texas here?
Yeah, man. I also think we don't need to necessarily get away from Udo. I know Daly does take up a ton of that fantasy goodness, but
right.
Udo was impressive, man. I don't see how they don't give him a little bit more work, seeing what he did when he had a chance to shine, and he's only 5'9", right? So I don't want to completely get away from him. But yeah, on the North Texas side, yes, Sheffield has been beautiful every time. I think really just the one time he's been on the main slate, but every time he's played pretty much. And Ward too, obviously you get a massive discount on the price. I do think that there will be that kind of desire to maybe do the Chandler Morris supporting both receivers and get all 3 of them in the stack somehow. that gets really expensive, and it also, that time of possession thing can really hurt you if you use a quarterback and two receivers in a game where the other team has the ball a lot. So I think I probably am not going to force myself into using Chandler Morris. I think it's maybe going to be I pick one of the receivers as a run back to whatever my Army exposure is. I also think that, if Daly, even if he's good to go, or he's going to give it a go, or he's dressed out, like, what if he's not 100% and they just say, maybe he can't get hit 30 times today. Maybe we hand it off a little bit more to Udo. So I guess in my mind, even if he's going to play, I'm not as locked into just plugging him in the way that I ordinarily might be, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think Udo is probably the guy I'm most excited about. Obviously, if Daly's out, I'm extremely excited about him. It's a jam it in type situation, but I think either way, he's in consideration. And then either Sheffield or Ward, probably not both, as the run back for North Texas.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why I'm saying, like, the ownership on this one's going to be interesting, because if people are kind of getting away from it, makes me want to gravitate more towards it. If it's high chalk, then I might want to kind of back off a little bit. But yeah, the quarterback running back pairing, we've had a lot of success with that this year. So that might be a way to go as well. All right, moving on. We have Purdue versus Ohio State, 53.5 total. The Buckeyes are 38-point favorites. We have been waiting for the last 2 weeks, basically, for them to explode. We did get that Jeremiah Smith long touchdown against Nebraska a couple of weeks ago, but this offense, man, they got to give us something. And they get an opponent in Purdue where they can finally do that and placate our insatiable hunger for Jeremiah Smith points and Emeka Egbuka, of course. What do you think?
Man, 53 total and Ohio State favored by 38 points. After these last two games against Nebraska and Penn State, 38 points is a lot, man. They haven't scored more than 20 points the last couple of weeks. So, yeah, it's Purdue.
Purdue is going back to Hudson Card, so maybe the bookmakers think that they're going to score like less than 10. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and why are they doing that? The other guy,
don't know.
The Brown, he actually he looked really good against Illinois. Obviously terrible against Oregon. Everybody's going to look bad against Oregon, but
yeah,
let Ryan Brown sling it, man. Make this one interesting. But yeah, I guess they're not going to do that, and they're gonna keep us from doing triple Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith and Judkins stacks, because we can't get everybody involved too much. I don't know, man. Are they going to let Will Howard build his confidence, or are they going to just say, Judkins, take us home? I do think there'll be a ton of room to run for Judkins, right? And so that is one thing that has been difficult these last couple of weeks. Tough, stingy defensive fronts against Nebraska and against Penn State. Hasn't had a lot of room to run. Still actually looked decent, 14 for 95. Didn't get in the end zone, unfortunately. But the efficiency is somewhat there, and I think will be even more explosive in this one. I actually am a little bit more interested in Judkins than I am in the receivers, just because I think there's a massive O-line advantage that can open up some huge holes and let him get back to the Ole Miss version of Judkins that was going for 203 like clockwork. And so we haven't really seen that from him yet. And I think we might see something in this one. Henderson's just not right. It's so disappointing, because I've thought so highly of him, but he just has not shown the explosion. He'll have the holes. Could he get there, on a 1,200 and a score kind of line? Yeah. But I don't see the same upside with him as I do with Judkins. I didn't say I'm not using Will Howard, but I will say I'm not using Will Howard. I'll just get that out of the way. Smith, obviously, we have the potential for a long, explosive play, but then he's kind of disappeared, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. He was fantastic up until the Oregon game, and even in the Oregon game. But then these last two, I mean, tough defenses. Don't get me wrong, but you got to come out and make plays, and so. Maybe they'll feature him. Maybe they'll dial up some deep shots to get him going, build the confidence a little bit. I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm definitely not like chips all in on Jeremiah Smith or Egbuka in this one. They are both to me interesting, but not extremely necessary kind of plays. And I'm a little bit more focused on Judkins. So. Those are the guys, and I guess I should give a passing mention to Carnell Tate and Brandon Ennis. If you want a cheap receiver from this team, they probably will end up, one of them will end up with a long touchdown. And Brandon Ennis got in on the action for the first time seemingly all season. 2 catches for 33 and a touchdown in a competitive game against Penn State. So maybe there's a focus on getting him more involved in this one. So at only 3-1, he would certainly allow you to spend up on some running backs elsewhere. But as far as the main pieces go, I'm mainly focused on Judkins. And then obviously on the other side, we're not using Hudson Card ever, so we don't need to dig too far into that. We're not using Maccabee. And then it really comes down to, do you believe in any of these receivers enough? I will say Max Clare's had a ton of volume at big tight end. I don't know that he's going to match up super well with an Ohio State defense that tends to be pretty athletic and certainly more so than most of the guys on the Purdue side. Jamal Edgerine, 5 for 54 and touchdown against Northwestern. Certainly an interesting play, but why not just go Dymere Miller at 4K instead in a lot better spot? And then not a whole lot of interest in anyone else on the Purdue side. So in summary, Judkins the main play, and then whichever receiver you feel best about and fits into your construction is also allowable on the Ohio State side, but not not as much of a focus as you might think with this massive score and total and everything.
Yeah, I just worry because I've been, waiting for the Ohio State breakout. I didn't play them last week. Obviously, that worked out, and I don't know, I have a weird feeling. Maybe I'll just hit their props instead. All right, moving on. Georgia versus Ole Miss. Total of 55. Georgia 2.5-point favorites. We'll start with the Ole Miss side with Jackson Dart just absolutely annihilating the slate. Thank God he wasn't super chalky. 52.5 points against Arkansas. 25 of 31. That's an 80.6% completion rate. 515 yards. 6 touchdowns. No interceptions. He's pretty much dead as the Heisman, but that if he would have been in the race still and put up that performance, I don't know, man. That might have been like his Heisman moment. Just they picked apart Arkansas time and time again. Priced at 9.6, going up against a much tougher defense. I'm not going to chase that performance. I would love it if people did, but certainly not expecting him to do that. I think he'll have a decent game, but at the price he's at now, decent isn't good enough. The running back room, things are dire straits. They will be without Henry Parrish. They're already been without Logan Diggs since transferred for the entire time. They got the MAC transfer there, Rashad Amos, who's been hurt since week 4. He's not on the injury report, so we might see some Amos in this game at 3-3, but that's a little bit scary. More likely that we see Dom Thomas. who did rush for 41 yards last week, and then perhaps even some Ulysses Bentley. But obviously, we don't want to be targeting against Georgia too heavily there and burning a very valuable running back spot on a cheap guy that is maybe going to give us 2 or 3 fantasy points is a recipe for not profiting whatsoever. The receiver room also very banged up. Trey Harris is doubtful and looking like he's not going to play, has not played since week 7. Being out last week opened the door for Jordan Watkins to have the most ridiculous game. Never seen him play so well. Whoever was assigned to him on week 10, they should probably just go to JUCO football or something, because 8, 254 and 5. That's just like the most ridiculous line. He is on the injury report as well. Was doubtful just 2 days ago, but now he is sitting at questionable. With the way that Lane Kiffin does his injury reporting and the threatening that the SEC commissioner has done is directly because of him. They make up injuries. I'm just going to call it like it is. They make up injuries and they drag their feet and they do a lot of deceptive things when it comes to their injury report. So I can't even say that I truly believe Watkins is even questionable at this point, but we'll see. He's only 4.7. I don't want him to play. It's Georgia, so I don't want to be forced to play him. But with the upside that he showed there, people are going to chase that performance. And if he does it again at like 35%, he's not going to do that again. But like, say he puts up 102 at 4.7 at 40%, 50%, you're just dead. You might min cash, whatever, but we're playing to make some money here, and that's going to be a tough one. So I don't want to be forced into playing him. And I typically don't worry about chalk. That's why I'm very happy college basketball is back, because I don't have to. But football is a little bit of a different story there. So we'll see what happens there with that actually injury reporting, which is an afternoon window game. So we'll probably be waiting to the last second there, knowing Lane Kiffin. Caden Lee also popped up on the injury report. So he's been really good without Trey Harris the last couple of weeks. 4 for 59 against Oklahoma. Then he went for 5 for 127, paid off at 3.9, priced at 4.5. Both he and Watkins. I wouldn't certainly play them together, but if they're both playing, like Georgia defensively, they're not quite the juggernaut they've been in the past. You can still do some things on them, and they're just too cheap not to try. If Watkins was like 7K as he should be, then we wouldn't even have to worry about it. Like, I probably wouldn't even I'd monitor the news still, of course, but I wouldn't be like checking it every 5 seconds like I will be on here. Caden Priestcorn is probable, like their tight end. Everybody, I believe he missed last game. They're just banged up everywhere. Like, this team has done quite well and work with what they have, but they are just so banged up. And it seems like the -2.5, it's either the trappiest line of the year, because I feel like it's just a Georgia win by 10 plus, or maybe it really is that easy. We'll see. It would be nice to see Juice Wells kind of, have a big breakout if ever there was a time for it to happen. It was these last 2 weeks. He does have 6 catches for 90 plus yards in the last 2 games, but when your teammate goes 8, 254 and 5, that just kind of pales in comparison a little bit. If everybody's out, Watkins, Harris, and Lee, it does make some sense to maybe go to Daquan Wright, who seemingly out of nowhere went for 9.99 and 2. He would be almost the last man standing at that point. So just very cheap Ole Miss receivers. You had asked about some potential value there. This is value I don't really want to play, but there will be some volume there that we have to look at. The Georgia side last week didn't particularly go very well for me. I had a pretty decent lineup, but once we got to the Georgia game, ETN got hurt in the first half, and that just was a death sentence. I ended up bubbling by 3 in most single entry contests. So obviously we would have been in very good shape had Etienne played in the second half. 7 for 31. He's not on the injury report, so we'll see. I'm not probably going back there. Like, he felt like the ultimate slam dunk last week, right? Against Florida. Would have gotten heavy volume, but unfortunately at 6.5, which is a good price for him, I'm not looking there. And you can look to like Nate Frazier, who's the talented youngster, 19 for 82 and a touchdown. Like, the Etienne play would have just smashed for us, obviously. I haven't played Carson Beck a single time this year. Not sure if you have. I'm guessing no. He is interesting, I guess, at 7.5 against this Ole Miss team. He has thrown 40 plus times in 4 of his last 5 games. So I guess there is some upside there. He has scored 30 plus fantasy points in 2 of his last 5 as well. But I never even think of rostering Carson Beck. And I think the last time I did was like week 8 of last year, and he didn't do very well. And then the receiver room for Georgia, it's got a ton of talent, but it's one of those situations where you roster Arian Smith and you watch Dom Lovett go off. You roster Dylan Bell and you watch Arian Smith go off. So it's a little bit tough. They are cheap, like Smith at 5K, Bell at 4.8, Lovett at 4.7. The presence now of London Humphreys has definitely cut into these targets. And basically what it's come down to is a lot of guys getting 2 to 5 targets each game. And you need them to be uber efficient, even at these 4.7, 4.8, and 5K prices to really do anything. So this is one of those games that may end up being one of the better ones of the week, like a marquee game to watch or even bet on. I think the Georgia side is probably the way to bet. That might be the fish way, but it feels right. But for DFS purposes, I can't find myself too excited about anything here other than having my arm twisted into having to play Jordan Watkins if he actually plays. Do you have an opinion on this one?
I just wish we could take Brock Bowers and put him back on Georgia for one game and have him go dominate this Ole Miss. I would pay like $9K for Brock Bowers in this Georgia offense right now. That Jordan Watkins game, man, that was so stupid. That was absolutely ridiculous. And it was like, oh man, he caught 2 touchdowns. This is like the game of his life. And it's like, oh, we didn't even know the half of it. Absolutely amazing. And yes, with every Frazier carry, I was going, should have been ETN.
Yep.
Just the most tilting stuff happening, and now these two teams get to play each other. I think that this is gonna be a good spot for ETN to make it up to us. I wish he was a little more expensive to kind of keep people off of him a little bit. But I think there's going to be a lot of tendency on paper. Ole Miss, is in theory good against the run. But I think that this is a really good spot for him. And I think the ownership will be very, very low. So I do like him as kind of a potential low-owned play if we can fit him into the construction where we also like some other expensive running backs.
Yeah, I don't hate it. There's, many a times in the last 10 plus years of DFS has a semi-chalky or uber chalky player busted. Everybody jumped off and that player proceeded to go nuts. Obviously, his was injury related, but yeah, that's a tale as old as time for sure. All right, moving on. We have Iowa State versus Kansas. I like this one, 50.5 total. 3-point favorites are the Cyclones. The future we have is over 7.5 wins. They're at 7. Don't want them to get stuck. Need that 8th win here against Kansas. Intriguing game for sure. What do you think?
Yeah, man. I cannot figure this Iowa State team out, right? Like that. Starting with that UCF game, like that UCF game turning into a massive shootout makes no sense if you look at it in the context of like every other Iowa State game. And then you say, okay, they snuck by in that one. The defense fell asleep. They've got Texas Tech. They're going to put up like 50 on Texas Tech. Nope, they lost for no reason at all. Doesn't make any sense. Nobody got anything going in the running game. They're extremely efficient, if frustrating running game where, one of 3 guys will get 10 carries for 130 yards and 3 touchdowns, and you never know which one. And it could be the quarterback. They didn't even get going at all last week. And the only guy that did anything was Higgins. And so Higgins is like the one guy you can kind of trust on a week-to-week basis on Iowa State, and he's up at 7-1 now. And so I'm not saying that means you can't play Higgins, because I do like him and his volume and this matchup and everything about it a lot. But if I like 2 running backs that are 8K plus, I got to really like Higgins at 7-1. Same problem I have with Jeremiah Smith. And so I think, there's probably going to be a way that I find him, into the lineup. Obviously, this Kansas team can be beaten every which way. I just worry a little bit that if I go Higgins, it turns into a Carson Hansen game, or it turns into a Rocco Beck runs it 15 times game. And Beck's at that 6.9 price. It's low enough. It's kind of like the Castellanos thing where it's low enough and he kind of runs a little bit. Going to be a little bit interested. Not totally getting away from it. We saw what his upside looked like against UCF. We haven't seen upside like that in literally any other game. So could this be a spot where you get away with a Becton Higgins stack? Could be, but I think I probably would just prefer to go Higgins. As far as the running backs go, I don't know, man. Flip a three-headed coin. Sama came back and got a bunch of carries, relatively speaking, last week. 13 carries, 74 yards. Okay, didn't score, whatever. Hanson, 11 carries, didn't do anything, didn't score 3 touchdowns. I don't know why. Jalen Jackson, only 6 carries. After having been the guy for like 4 weeks in a row, he was down to 8 carries against UCF and then only 6 against Texas Tech. If you have the magic 8 ball that is going to tell you which dude is going to get 15 carries in this game, play that dude because they're all under 4K. I don't know. I can't pick it, man. I've gotten them wrong all but once this year. Higgins I've gotten right because he does well every game. So I'm a lot more confident in using Higgins. And Noel's kind of taken a back seat in terms of volume, in terms of efficiency, in terms of touchdowns. It's kind of just been the Higgins show. So I'm going to lean that way on the Iowa State side. On the Kansas side, it is interesting because we saw Texas Tech, move the ball. We saw Taj Brooks be a bowling ball. We saw Josh Kelly go for a ridiculous amount of yards and a couple scores. We've got Jalen Daniels down there at 5,800. And if it were 3 games ago for Iowa State, I would say, well, yeah, of course, it's a really tough defense. And I don't think that, Jalen Daniels can really deal with the pressure, and he's going to throw a bunch of picks and fumble the ball all the time and break his hand and end up on the sideline. This Iowa State defense seems beatable now. And Jalen Daniels at 5,800, even if he's terrible passing the ball, is still going to run it 15 times. So if he gets, 100 yards and touchdown on the ground, doesn't have to do a lot through the air. And that's what we saw in the UCF game. Do we want to go with Jalen Daniels over Devin Neal, though? That is always the question when it comes to Kansas. Jalen Daniels is actually the cheaper one. Devin Neal up there at 6,700. He's been steady as it can be. 1366 in a score, but then 5 catches against K-State. And he is involved in the offense. Even when Jalen Daniels does well, Devin Neal also finds a way to get his. It just becomes a question of, do we want to pay that premium for the I guess the lack of a complete disaster of a game that we could get out of Jalen Daniels that we don't typically get out of Devin Neal. So do we want to pay a premium for safety there? If I can find a running back slot for him at that price, I'm certainly interested. There's just a lot of other running backs that I like too. As far as the receivers go, Kansas receivers are as frustrating as Iowa State running backs. Grimm seems to be, if there is such a thing as a consistent Kansas receiver, he's probably it. Lawrence Arnold, a little bit less volume, a little bit more efficiency. And then you get down into weird stuff with Quentin Skinner will go off and then get a 0. And Jared Casey pretty much does nothing. Every now and then he'll get a touchdown. It's ugly on the Kansas side. Trevor Wilson, I don't even really know if people play him. He's min-priced. He doesn't do a lot volume-wise except against K-State, 4 catches for 69 yards for some reason. So you want to play that roulette game, more power to you. Trevor Wilson's dart throw. The rest of the guys, not a whole lot better. I think it's really just Daniels and Neal, and probably not together. Pick one with the construction that works, and then pair him with Higgins on the Iowa State side. That would be my play from this game.
Yeah, the Daniels decision is tough because, I want to play 4 running backs, which looking at the running back pool this week, you can get away with just doing 3. Do I want to pay up for Daly? Do I want to pay up for, Shedeur Sanders? Yes, we'll talk about him in a second. So Daniel's decision is tough because it opens up the ability to play Travis Hunter, which is not something I care to do, but this week I kind of do. So, yeah, that's a tough one. You give us something to think about because that Daniel's price is 22 fantasy points. You're golden.
You could also go with the Castellanos and Daniels pairing and just pay very little for your 2 quarterbacks and have a ton of money to spend elsewhere.
Absolutely. All right, moving on, we have Clemson versus Virginia Tech. A total of 53. 6.5-point favorites is Clemson. Cade Klubnik, priced at 9.3. We'll start with him. 56 pass attempts against Louisville. He's been getting some nice volume, but it was one of his worst weeks. 228 yards, just the 1 touchdown. Did rush for 43 yards. He's been getting it done on the ground. People aren't noticing, but he's chunking along 30 to 50 yards every game, rushing yards. Pretty nice floor that he's got, but just a 17 fantasy points. Virginia Tech defensively, they can be beaten on the ground. The pass they're a little bit better against, but overall they're decent. I think the Klubnik price it's basically where it should be at this point. There's no upside there for us to go him over some of these other options we've already talked about, Shedeur Sanders. So I think we're looking to Phil Maffa, who is just habitually underpriced. The 6.5 is going to get a lot of attention. Against Louisville, 171 yards, 40 fantasy points, 2 touchdowns, also 5 catches for 28 yards for good measure. He does that. Even those, 2-3 catches really just enhances that, ceiling so much more. I do think this is a game we see him get 25 plus touches with ease. Virginia Tech has been giving up about 157 to 158 rushing yards per game. And most recently in that overtime game that they lost to Syracuse, they gave up a pretty nice game of 121 yards and 3 touchdowns to LaQuint Allen. So some real big upside here for Maffa at 6.5. And he's been chalked seemingly every week since like week 6, I think. And I think this is the week to probably eat that chalk. Clemson does throw the ball a lot, but you're seeing they're getting him more involved, and they're Dabo's understanding that they got to put the ball in his hands a lot. So certainly loving that play at 6.5. I think that's one of the primary running backs for me. The wide receiver room, Antonio Williams he's just too expensive compared to everyone else at 5.6. Like, he's pretty consistently giving you that 12 to 15 fantasy point floor, but there's just no real upside there. He's catching touchdowns. Better on FanDuel, I guess, but he's not hitting those 100-yard games. So it's pretty much, if you're looking there, you're going to Brenningstool, who's still really cheap at 4K, and Mr. Reliable, or you're taking a shot on one of my cheap freshmen, TJ Moore, who we hit a touchdown on a couple of weeks ago, and he was still involved. 5 for 63 last week, sitting there at 3.3, or Bryant Wesco, who returned from injury after being out for 4 weeks, 7 catches for 53 yards. Klubnik really likes Wesco, and you saw him shake off the ankle injury and be highly involved there in that game against Louisville, even though they did stagnate out and end up losing that game. So those are some near min price options in Wesco and Moore that I still like more than Williams by a fair amount. I think those two are going to be big time stars next year. We're going to be talking about them a lot, and people still aren't using them. So you've got sub 5% on both, and guys who can give you 10 to 15 fantasy points for a fraction of the price that Antonio Williams is. On the Virginia Tech side, Kieran Drones does seem like he's going to play. He's been a full participant during practice the last 3 days. 7.5, it's a pretty fair price for him. He's been up over 8K. I think a lot of people will probably overlook him this week. We know he's got that rushing upside. He's got the receiving weapons. He has an all-world running back in Bayshell Tootin. Just not a lot of accuracy on a consistent basis, but I do think you can pay up that 7-5 with a 25, 26 fantasy point game. But the question is, can we get that at 5-8 from Daniels, 6-6 from Castellanos? We can. So just really no reason to maybe pay him in your main, but I do like some exposure there for sure. Tootin is, I think, a little underpriced at 8-3. Like, there's no reason. Yeah, he had a pretty rough game, and he was injured, and he's got the leg issue and all that. But I think he's going to play. I think he's going to try to play. And I want him to be like 9K because I didn't want to have to play him in, coming back from an injury. And he might end up being out. We'll see. But it looks like he's practicing and trying to do some things. So we'll see what happens there. They're obviously going to need him. If he doesn't play, it really puts a lot of pressure on drones. We did see Malachi Thomas against Syracuse rush for 73 yards and a touchdown. He hasn't been relevant since like 2022. So it was good to see him at 3-4. That would provide us with a little bit of value there. You can run to a degree on Clemson. So if that were to happen, I wouldn't mind using him. And then the receiving room for Virginia Tech remains cheap, but it's pretty well anyone's guess. We saw Jalen Lane, no catches last week, but he did get 4 carries and scored a rushing touchdown because, they didn't have Tootin. So they decided to run the football and pull a Savion Williams. He's 5'2". If that were to be the case again, I guess there's somewhat interest there as a running back, slot back type. Daquan Felton remains cheap at 3.5. You do have Benji Gosnell, the tight end, at 3.4. He's good for the red zone touchdowns. Allie Jennings, who at 3.2, if this was 2021, 22 Rice, and you were telling me about Allie Jennings being 3.2, I would have been totally bewildered about it. Now he's 3.2, and I don't know that we can really even use him, unfortunately. He did catch a touchdown against Syracuse. Love to see it. But overall, I think news in the afternoon window is going to be so important. If Tootin can't go, we'll kind of, like we've been doing in CBB, kind of process it in real time in the Discord, but it would be hard not to want to just pay 3-4 for Malachi Thomas just because of the anticipated touches alone there. But definitely a lot of value in this game on both sides. Maffa, I think, is for me a core lock, and I would imagine he's going to be 50% or more in single entry because college football right now is extremely chalky. It's disgusting, but that's the world we live in right now. So do you have anything you want to add before we move on here for the home stretch?
Yeah, man, all in on Maffa. I understand the ownership, but he's been on a tear lately and can't be stopped. And I think they have a pretty sizable advantage in the trenches on this one. So like him a lot.
All right, we'll move on to Michigan versus Indiana, a total of 49.5. Now, we're less than a year removed from Michigan being the national champions, but they are 14.5-point dogs, unless I got it wrong, to Indiana. Crazy how fast life can truly come at you. The Hoosiers football team is awesome right now. Michigan, not too much. What do you think?
Yeah, man, the year of the transfer portal, things can change just that quickly. Tough if you're a Wolverine fan. You know what? I hope you enjoyed things last year. Curtis Rourke, man, how about his road to leading an undefeated Indiana team? Yeah, he got hurt, missed a week, but he's back at it. Looked phenomenal. Looked too good against Michigan State. They scored too much too quickly. Michigan State couldn't keep up, and he ended up with 263 yards and 4 touchdowns in a game that they won by 37 points. And could have had a much bigger day had Sparty been able to keep up at all. Kind of expect more of the same here. Not completely getting away from him, but I also think that this is a game where Indiana just rolls, scores in a variety of different ways. Maybe it's Curtis Rourke throwing 7 touchdown passes, but probably not. And we haven't really seen him run the ball a ton this year. And when he hasn't been awfully successful doing it. So a little bit more than I would want to pay for a quarterback that's not going to be throwing for all 4 quarters, most likely. But doesn't mean I don't want other parts of this Indiana offense. So Both Ellison and Lawton are in play. They didn't get a ton of carries just because there were so many touchdowns that happened other ways very quickly in the game against Michigan State. But at 5'2", Justice Ellison's definitely in play. At 4'4", Tyson Lawton definitely in play. Of the two, probably have a slight preference for Ellison. He does seem to get volume work when the situation calls for volume work. The receiver room is pretty diverse. Not something that has always been the case for Indiana, but it is the case here. Elijah Surratt is more or less the alpha of the offense, as much as there is one in a passing offense that is pretty spread out. Seems to find his way into the end zone more often than not. Had a couple scores against Michigan State, which very much buoyed his performance there, coming off of a very much down performance the week before against Washington, only one catch for 12 yards. Didn't do much else. But he's had some explosive games, over 100 yards 3 times so far this year and 5 touchdowns on the season, including those 2 last week. Omar Cooper also involved. Miles Price scored a touchdown against Michigan State as well. Not going to see a ton of volume with anyone outside of those 3. So probably would be best to keep your focus there. We did see Keyshawn Williams, after not having more than 4 catches in any game this season, went for 6 catches and 86 yards against Michigan State. That is probably a function of blowout as opposed to something that we should expect to continue, although I don't know that this isn't necessarily going to be that same set of circumstances, and so we might end up seeing the same amount of Keyshawn Williams, and he's pretty efficient. They may look to get him some additional looks. So down at 3,400, could definitely see him getting across 100 yards and a score if they get to that blowout scenario, but continue to throw the way that they did against Michigan State. On the other side, we'll keep it really simple for you. Colston Loveland. Only Colston Loveland for Michigan. That's the only guy that they throw the ball to with any volume, and that's what they should be doing because that's the only guy that actually catches the ball when they throw it to him. So 4,800, massive volume each of the last 3 weeks. That change of quarterback has really helped him. Having a real quarterback that can throw the ball down the field tends to help a pass catcher, and he's done a great job of producing. 7 for 112 last week against Oregon. So even against really strong competition, he showed up, and then 6 for 67 and 2 against Michigan State. So he can do it against good competition. He can do it against bad competition. He's probably one of my favorite plays on the slate, which is weird to say. Michigan passing game, don't usually think of going there, but I think there's a ton of volume locked in and a lot of upside at that price.
Yeah, I definitely want some Indiana shares. I agree. I think getting that right could be the potential winner of the slate, like a Ellison or an Omar Cooper 2 touchdown game, something like that. So something to think about. But yeah, it's crazy. I mean, Michigan fans can't be mad. You can have a real bad season. Like they could have won 1 game this year and still been like super jacked, right? But definitely weird to see how fast that turnaround happened. But the transfer portal can take them right back to the top next year if they play it right. All right, last game on the slate, Colorado versus Texas Tech, total of 62.5. Colorado was -3. That was a featured bet for us on Tuesday. It's now -4 on DraftKings and -4.5 on FanDuel. So hopefully you got that 3. I do like Colorado to win this game outright and cover the 3. Should be an absolute electric game. We know at this point we can target against Texas Tech all the time. Colorado's defense has shored up a lot. Travis Hunter is a big reason for that, but the running game can still get off, and we have a perfect stack opportunity here with the Colorado passing game and the running game of Texas Tech. Starting off with Shedeur Sanders at 8-9. I haven't really considered using him all that much this season. It's just been the kind of thing where, he's up 24, 9.6, and we've been okay. And he's been priced so high, 9.6, 10. He was over 10K to start the season, but at 8.9, this is the cheapest he's ever been this season. I shouldn't say ever been, but this season alone. And he's got quite possibly, other than playing Maryland, the best matchup possible. It just seems like a mortal lock for 30, but I mean, 400 plus yards, 4 touchdowns. Maybe he rushes one in. He does have 2 rushing touchdowns in each of the, or one in each last game. So I love the Shedeur Sanders play, and it's a very difficult decision because I don't like paying up for 2 quarterbacks, but Sanders and Daly together, the upside is ridiculously high. Or you could go the Sanders, Daniels route, Castellanos. There's 4 or 5 quarterbacks in the slate I think we can really zero in on and possibly play 2. And Sanders is definitely one of them. Running game for this team, the crazy part is they're starting to develop a running game. Isaiah Auguste, he rushed 22 times against Cincinnati. They really leaned into him, and he did well. 4.1 YPC, 91 yards, and a touchdown. He scored on the ground 3 straight times. That would be one way to go to this because I think Colorado passing game obviously will be popular. Auguste would be an interesting type of, throw in their 3.9 value play at running back and hope that he usurps the 100-yard mark and scores again because he's been pretty solid. The receiving room, everybody's going to want to play Travis Hunter. He's very expensive on FanDuel, once again, over 10K, and 9.5 on DK. If you fade it, you hoping for one of those, 3 for 26 games, but I don't know that 3 for 26 against Texas Tech is even possible without an injury. And since he plays both sides of the ball, he does get banged up a lot. So there is merit to trying to get away from that price there of 9.5 because it's a lot for a receiver. I think on FanDuel it's more necessary. But when you look over here, you have LeJohntay Weister at 5.2, which to me is just a no-brainer play. You also have Elijah Surratt at 5.2, you just talked about. Like, there's some pretty nice options there. Isaiah Horton from Miami. You could do a little mid-range receiver in, stacking your lineup and feel pretty good about it. Wester is just, really, really good at this price. Going to score a touchdown. 100-yard plus upside. I mean, that's just way too easy to me. Will Shepherd is cheap at 3.8. He had a real bad game against Cincinnati. We kept waiting for him to have a good game. The UCF game, we jumped on him a little bit, and we got rewarded. He scored 3 straight touchdowns from week 5 to week 8. Now he's back to being, sub 4K. Nobody's probably going to be really looking there after last game, but the Sanders, Wester, Shepherd stack, it neutralizes the Sanders price a little bit. You can get a really high volume stack for a very cheap price with those 3 together. Then you can run it back on the Texas Tech side with Taj Brooks, who we love. We've been rostering Taj Brooks for years. Now he's popular all the time. Real good game against Iowa State. The 8.4 price, it's, not too high. If it's like 9K, I think you really start to think like, can I do this? But at 8.4, you can still take his 25 and feel good about it. But, this is one where I think he does put up 30 plus, 180 to 200 yard type of game. They're just going to be running it down their throats, I think. And he has some reception upside as well. So tailor-made, easy to fit type of stack with 4 players from this game, which will probably be somewhat popular. You have Baron Morton all the way down there at 6K. He's going to throw 50 times as well. Like, the offenses there's going to be so much pace. Like, I could see Brooks with 25 touches. I could see him, Baron Morton, throw 40, 50 times. So at 6K, he's not a horrible GPP look. Maybe you go with the Texas Tech passing stack with Morton, and then you go with Auguste. That's one way in GPP to get different with this game. And then when you look at the receivers, Caleb Douglas had been just absolutely nuking. He had the 9 for 140 against TCU, 9 for 99 and 3 touchdowns against Baylor, 5 for 116 against Arizona. People crowning him as, oh, maybe this guy's the alpha, but, you and I both were kind of like, it's still Josh Kelly. Just wait. There could be a big game looming. And he had 8 for 127 and 2, and reminding people that, hey, I'm still around here. When you look at the Texas Tech target share, he has 96 targets through 9 games, leading the team, almost 100 now, 69 catches, 765 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Then you have Douglas with 64 targets and Coy Eakin with 53. So very concentrated amongst those 3. Kelly's not that expensive at 6K. You can easily fit him in as well. I do think he kind of gets forgotten about a little bit. Douglas is still cheap at 4.6, and then Eakin, who nobody really uses anymore. He had a nice game against TCU at 4.56-1, only 3.9. I would rather use Will Shepherd, but again, a reverse stack in this one with the Texas Tech passing game. I would include somebody like Eakin there, just knowing he's going to be sub 5% owned. But yeah, this is the first week all season that I felt like I had to play Shedeur Sanders. Not only had, but I wanted to play Shedeur Sanders. It sounds like you're pretty adamant about some of those cheaper quarterbacks, which I think is a great idea. But with this stack being so prominent, do you see yourself using Sanders at all, even in an alt lineup?
So I just plugged in a Shedeur, Jalen Daniels, Taj Brooks, Travis Hunter lineup. And you actually are left over with like 4,300 for every spot thereafter. So you can, if you find some cheap receivers that you like, if one of those cheap running backs goes our way, with regard to, injury and maybe like a Raymond from Rutgers getting 15 touches, that kind of thing, you can actually make a reasonable lineup with all of Shedeur, Travis Hunter, and Taj Brooks. You might even be able to throw Josh Kelly in it too. Although, I don't know, man. Do you think that Travis Hunter is going to man up with Josh Kelly when he's on defense, and that would allow Caleb Douglas to kind of run free again? Or how do you think they're going to play that?
I think he's gonna definitely be on Kelly, which makes me kind of want, Eakin Douglas type exposure there. I don't know. I'm leaning towards the main team fade of Hunter. Might be a death sentence, but I don't know. I feel like this can be a game where he gets dinged up and he exerts a lot of energy on defense. I feel like he wants to show out on defense this week against the Texas Tech offense. So I feel like he's going to put up 25, but how much over 30 is he really going to get to justify that price? Is kind of how I'm looking at it.
Shedeur with one or multiple Colorado receivers as opposed to Shedeur with Hunter.
That's how I'm thinking. With Shepherd, because Shepherd and Wester are just so cheap. Like, that's such an easy triple stack to me.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, and that's the way to play it against Texas Tech. I mean, we just saw Higgins go absolutely bonkers. So yeah, if he's able to lock onto one of those other guys, that could be fantastic.
Absolutely. All right, so that finishes up the slate. We'll get into a core here, and then we'll end on slate breakers. But let's go over to PrizePicks, Underdog, some betting stuff. I have 3 PrizePicks plays that I want to get, and then we'll go over to you. Shedeur Sanders over 328.5 passing yards. I feel like he's throwing 400. This is one of those props that just seems way too easy. Rocket Sanders over 89.5 rushing plus receiving yards. Shout out to Rocket Sanders, 4% on, the night slate last weekend, and he just goes bonkers. We'll love Rocket Sanders. He doesn't get enough love in the industry. And then Dylan Gabriel over 286.5 passing yards. This one's real simple. He's playing Maryland. When a team is playing Maryland, the quarterback's going to throw for 300 plus yards. So you have a lot of extra room there at 286.5. DK and FanDuel aren't even offering passing props on Gabriel this week because they know. What do you got for us?
All right. So I'm going to start out with, let's go rushing yards. We'll go from the Friday night game. Your boy, Caleb Johnson, gets UCLA. 125.5. I think he gets to 150. So pretty easy over for Caleb Johnson. Not a lot of teams you could throw against him that I would think he would get, be less than 150, and UCLA is not one of those teams. Gonna stick with the rushing yards. Gonna go Quinshon Judkins over 88.5. See him getting some explosives early on in this one and making that number kind of silly. And then we'll go to a passing touchdowns number. We're going to go, and this one is it's a demon, right? Demon is the red one. Yeah. Demon, not goblin. A demon is Max Brosmer over 1.5 passing touchdowns. So 2 touchdowns, and it's a demon play. I like him throwing to one to Spencer and one to Jackson, and we got our Damon on that one.
Let's go. All right, I have a couple bets. The two featured ones from earlier, Colorado was -3 when we got it. If you're doing it now, it's -4. Still like it. And then Maryland versus Oregon over 57.5 total points. I think both defenses have proven they're susceptible, especially Maryland, but Oregon too. That one should sail over 60. Shedeur Sanders 400 plus passing yards. It's over on FanDuel, that prop plus 400. I don't know, man. That to me, that feels real confident. I haven't been that confident about a prop in a long, long time. And then LeJohntay Weister with that 100 plus receiving yards at plus 225. You can get Hunter 100 plus receiving yards at -118, which will probably still hit. But that Wester Sanders like SGP combination right there that's potential Jenny Wealth territory there with that game if it plays out the way we think it will. So being so highly involved with Colorado this weekend it's not a comfortable feeling, but that 400 plus yard passing prop feels pretty good. All right, that takes us to the end here. We'll get actually let's get our cores. Almost forgot. What's the core you're looking at before we get your slate breaker?
Sure. So we're gonna go with Jalen Daniels at quarterback. We're gonna go with Quint. I'll actually give you two on the running backs. We're going to go LaQuint Allen and Quinshon Judkins at running back. We'll give you both of those. And then as a receiver, we'll go with Higgins from Iowa State.
Mine is Shedeur Sanders. Yeah, I can't get away from him. It's going to be my quarterback one. Will Shepard at 3.8 because that's going to allow me to get some of these high price running backs that I need. So 3.8 wide receiver, and then at running back, I think I'll give two as well because there's the one we got. I feel like I got to play and he's good, Phil Maffa. But the Kanye Udo play, you made some good points there. Even if Daly does go, Udo should still be highly involved at the 5.9. It's a really good matchup. So it's calling us for the 4 running backs week because there's a lot of them. But man, we got to figure out how to fit all this with some less than optimal value out there that's going to potentially bite us, but that's the fun of it. All right, so that is it. Let's get your slate breaker play. I have a feeling it's going to be one of 2 running backs, but maybe I'm way wrong. Let's hear it. And what's their stat line?
Yeah, we're going to go Ohio State get right game, Quinshon Judkins. Let's go with 20 carries for 175 yards and 3 touchdowns.
Love it. Let's go. Yeah, man. This is the one that you're going to hit too. I feel pretty good about this one. Ohio State bounce back week. Judkins, Old Miss flavor, like not even like freshman year Old Miss. Let's get it. Appreciate everybody who tuned in live. That will be the end of the show. We'll be back Saturday morning, 1 hour before lock, answering your questions. We'll be there this time. Missed last week because I pulled the all-nighter. Too old for that now. Didn't work. Not good. But we'll be there for that. And then there will be a myriad of college basketball shows starting next Monday. Obviously, daily content there. Jake will have the night slate written up for you by Saturday afternoon. That'll drop. Main slate content dropping tomorrow, betting stuff, all kinds of things at FTN. Don't sleep. We don't. Appreciate it. Take care, guys. Let's get those green screens and window trips going. Take care.